All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today I'm going to talk about my weekend fishing adventures, and I tried something a little different. I went fly fishing for bass.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world.
I'm a huge fanatic for handmade, high-quality leather and canvas products. In my opinion, they last longer, hold up better to the abuses of travel, and honestly, they just look really cool. That's why I use Badger Claw Outfitters. They've been making handcrafted products for hunting, camping, and travel since 2011, and that's right up my alley. Best part is they're made right here in the USA and are guaranteed for life. They've got everything from gun leather, belts, custom knife sheaths, wallets, duffel bags, leather and canvas pouches, everyday carry items, and more. Badger Claw Outfitters, made in the USA, built for the wild. So I went up to Round Lake up in Michigan. I've had pretty good success there for bass in the past. Some of the biggest bass I've ever caught locally. So I got a new fly rod from my good buddy Captain Steve Scooby I met down at the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit in exchange for helping him set up his podcast and editing some stuff. He sent me a badass custom fly rod, and I thought all fly rods were created equal, but apparently I was wrong. He sent me this custom 5-weight. It's this awesome green cover. It's got custom, wood inlays. It's got a really awesome smooth handle. And he hand-tied this whole thing. He had custom blanks made, all this crazy stuff that I don't really know. We're going to have him on the podcast and let him talk about it because he created the thing. He knows about it. But I have casted a fly rod further in having this rod for a few days than I have in the last few months practicing. So there's something to be said for that. And it was my first time using a nicer reel. He built it around this fly reel right here, the Orvis Clearwater 2. So I had it spooled with some special fly line he told me to get that he prefers for bass fishing. He's also a guide. So I took it out. Non-ideal conditions. I'll tell you, I took my kayak out. I know in the middle of the lake there's this big sandbar that I've fished at with success. I was out there most of the day with not a single bite. I got a lot of casting practice in. So I worked my way around the edges, and it's nice because this sandbar is very shallow. We're talking anywhere from 1.5 feet to maybe 3.5, 4 feet around the whole thing. So you can walk this giant sandbar in the middle of the lake and fish the whole way around it, where it drops off relatively steeply into the lake. So from everything I've learned about bass fishing, looks like an ideal place where bass would go. It's surrounded by weeds. There's totally awesome slopes that go down to the deep where they can chill during the day when they're in their little safe zones down there deep in the water. And the rest of the lake surrounding it is fairly deep, anywhere from 50 to 35 feet. So I figured it was worth a shot. So I kayaked out there. It was awful. The wind was just ripping as soon as I got there. It was like white capping out there. So probably wasn't the best idea to go do this by myself, but I did it anyway. And I had a hard time even getting my kayak to anchor when I got out. So I had to take it into this giant weed patch and drop the anchor to get it to even stay in place because it was just blowing everywhere. And then now I'm out here casting a fly rod in this insane wind. So it was rough conditions all the way around. The pressure was rising the whole day, but you don't always get to choose when you can fish. You still should go out and fish anyway, regardless, just to see what happens, in my opinion. So I spent probably about 3.5 hours out there with no success. So I went back to shore and I fished from the shore. Where I was fishing is a nice, flat, shallow space where I think that's where bass would like to spawn, even though I'm pretty sure I missed the spawn by probably a week. But, whatever. You only have so much time to do everything you want to do. And so I'm out there casting on this big flat. It's probably flat for a few hundred yards before it drops off. It comes to a big point in the lake, and then it drops off into basically from 6 foot of water to 35, 40 feet of water in a few hundred yards. So another place where I would think bass would be when they're coming up to feed and stuff. So I fished on that for a while. I casted probably for an hour straight. And then finally, I was getting ready to call it quits. And the sun came out. The wind died down for about a half hour. I could see under the water, super clear up there. And I'm casting and casting and casting. Figure I'm getting at least some good practice on my technique. And I was just saying like 5 more casts and I'm going home because this is just, my arms hurt from casting so long. I'm hungry. I hadn't eaten since like 8 in the morning and I left there about 7 o'clock at night, 6:30, 7 o'clock. And I was just beat. So I'm like 5 more casts from where I was casting off the shore and I'm done. And on like the 3rd cast out, I see something following this little streamer I'm throwing, and it's just following it, predatory. I'm like, definitely a bass. And I'm trying to hold my composure because if you've fished for that long straight without getting anything, it's really exciting when something finally happens. And so I'm stripping it at the same pace. I'm not changing anything, and the bass nails it. And then I remember Captain Scooby telling me, you need to strip set. You can't horse it like a normal bass set on a regular spinning rod. You're gonna pull it right out of their mouth. So I strip set really hard, and the bass is on. He's hooked great, and I'm fighting the biggest bass I've ever caught on a fly rod, and it was one hell of a ride. It was an awesome experience, especially on a little lighter rod like a 5-weight. I mean, it felt like a monster, and it was a pretty decent sized bass. It wasn't any world record setting bass, but I mean, for the size that I've caught in that lake, it was a pretty decent size, probably the 3rd biggest bass I'd ever caught in that lake. So I'm stripping it in, and I get him to the dock. I get him out of the water. I take a couple pictures, and made the whole day worth of it. All said and done, I spent about 5 hours in the crappiest conditions, casting, and finally I caught one of these bass, which was great. And I was super excited, and it just shows that this stuff is a lot of work. It can be, especially when you're still continually learning, and with a fly rod, you know, it's definitely brand new for me, but I just really wanted to catch something of some size on this custom rod to see what a good fight was like. So I made it happen, wrapped it all up, super successful day in my opinion, because I learned how to do some stuff that I have been intimidated by. And a good thing about casting in a big open lake where there's nobody around you that you can wade into is you have plenty of space to cast. There's nothing around. You're in open water. And this lake, I could wade 40 feet out into this lake and there's nothing around. So there's plenty of space to cast. And I learned how to double haul even at a basic level. And I got the cast out probably damn near close to 50 feet, which is for me great. I know there's other people out there who have been doing this for a long time. They're like, yeah, whatever. But I've never casted that far before. It is a lot to learn, especially when you're changing to different streamers and stuff all the time. They all have different weights to them, and some are harder to throw than others, and you get shit tangled up, and you get a million wind knots. But that's part of the learning process. So end of the day, very happy, caught a bass, set out what I wanted to do, and that is what is most important because I got it done. And that's what it takes sometimes. Sometimes you just got to go out there and grit it out. As Ranch Fairy has told me in person when I asked him about how he catches huge bass, he said, you just got to grind, dude. And he commented that on my Instagram post where I post that fish, so which was kind of cool, reminding me, got to get out there and grind. If you want to be in the minority, the people who catch the big fish, you got to put in the work. I'm also right now reading a book called Advanced Bass Fishing. I believe it's by John Weiss. It's pretty old. I think it's from the 80s, maybe even the late 70s. I'm not sure. I could just be making that up, but it's an old book. So much awesome advice in there. I'm only through like 3 chapters and I'm taking heavy notes because I really want to go after big bass. And the amount of information in that book is insane. Even though it's probably a little dated at this point, there's probably new information out there. I was still like going back to those OG books that really are the base level before we had all this technology, so that when I do get to use that technology, it's so much easier for me. So I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you're going to go out there and grind it out and catch some fish this summer, this spring, wherever we're in when this comes out. And I hope you guys learned something. I'm glad that you're watching. So thank you very much. And I'll be back soon with another episode. Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.